A very good evening. Today we will be discussing about, in the age of big data and AI, how your data is protected in India, right? So I'll start with a saying or a quotation from a former Google ethicist who says, if you control the menu, you control the choices, and if you control the choices, you control the behavior. The word is behavior over here. And what is its implication in case of data? So let us consider one example after the other. So first is the example of Cambridge Analytica. What it did, it participated in US elections, right? And using the psychometric ocean technology, that is openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neurotics, it created a voter profile and put down the points like what is the interest of an individual, right? His political ideology, how he identifies himself, and through that they pushed down the targeted advertisements, and they created an atmosphere through which the neutral voters got swung in a particular direction. So you understand how big data can be used in such a scenario, where a behavior of an individual can be mapped. The second example is the Newsfeed Experiment conducted by Facebook, in which around 6,89,000 Facebook users were subject to an experiment in which their positive or negative emotions were brought forth by the newsfeed of their friends through the process of contagion emotion. What it is, for example, if you see a positive news feed, you might have a positive emotion or you post positively, and if you see a negative news feed, you might post negatively. So they concluded at the end of it that the news feed that there is of your friend will swing in a positive emotion or a negative emotion in you, right? And they conducted it on 6,89,000 people, and when asked why did they do so, so they mentioned that it was to improve their services and to make the content on Facebook more engaging. So I don't understand whether we want such engagement or not, where a behavior is manipulated by the data that we put in. Today we are discussing about data protection, right? And why we are discussing this? Because such things have a direct relation to the privacy mechanism, because our decision making is forms a very basic of the ethos of privacy, right? And now our privacy is in danger. So how come data protection is related to privacy? It can be considered as a subset of privacy, right? Or information privacy, or how the data is controlled or processed or managed or stored by an individual or a state or a non-state actor. Not an individual basically, but a state or a non-state actor, right? So there in the West, in the international arena, it has been divided, the legal framework has been divided into 4 sets. That is the principles, then you have the rights of the data subjects, then you have the how the data is processed, the transboundary flow of data, and the accountability mechanism to bring and the accountability mechanism to look after how you can make an individual who is managing your data accountable for any breaches. So there are principles laid down in the OECD, that is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. You have the APEC, that is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. You have the Madrid Resolution talking about, and you also have the Global Pulse, that is Secretary General driven organization to look after how data and what should be the principles regarding data management in the world of big data, right? So these principles can be listed down. For example, the principle of purpose limitation, that how for what purpose the data should be used, and the consent limitation, that before using of data, consent should be asked. The use limitation, it should be restricted to the use for which the consent is asked for. You have the accountability principle, the data minimization principle. The data minimization principle talks about the minimum amount of data should be taken. The right to be forgotten principle, that talks about that you have a right to be forgotten. The data quality principle, that looks after that the accuracy of the data should be maintained, right? So this is the legal framework in the international arena that is there. Now coming to the Indian arena. So as such, we do not have any dedicated law in India regarding data protection. But what we have are various efforts related to it. For example, the Right to Privacy Bill introduced in around 2011. We have the Personal Data Protection Bill introduced in Rajya Sabha in 2014, the Data Privacy and Protection Bill in 2017 introduced by a BJD MP, right? And all these try to bring in the attention of the legislature that there is a need for protection of data. Also, there is an AP Shah committee report on privacy that talks about the 9 principles related to consent, what do you call the consent, then you have the use limitation, the purpose limitation, and the other principles that are there in the international arena and how it should be included in the Indian atmosphere, right? So these are the efforts that have taken place, but there is no consolidated law as such. But this comes to the point, this leads us to the point that how the data is protected in India. There are 2 main legislations. One is the IT Act and the other is the IT rules. The IT rules is the, formed under section 43A of the IT Act, and it has provisions dealing with how sensitive personal information should be protected, right? So once we are talking about it, what we need to deal with it is we need to look at what the rules in general protect first, and what are the issues in regard to that. There are 3 to 4 basic issues. One, under the IT rules, the state actors or the government isn't involved. So who is involved is a company, a firm, association who is involved in business or profession activity, right? The government is out of the question, or the state actor is out of the question. Second, there are 2 concepts of personal information and sensitive personal information, and which have been, there are many principles of international in the international arena which have been included in the IT rules itself, but they only apply to the sensitive personal information, not to the personal information in general. For example, under Rule 5, where consent is to be obtained for collecting of sensitive personal information. So what does the rule protect is only the collecting of the personal information, not the processing of the personal information, because and that in itself is a very big drawback, because in the age of big data, what is happening is we are not able to cope up how the processing is being done, rather than looking into the other atmosphere, rather than looking into the various dimensions of it. So there are various issues that are there in regard to data protection, and we do not have a consolidated legal framework for it. So, but the positive sign in all this is that a new committee has been formed of experts under Justice B.N. Sri Krishna, which will lay down in December or January most probably the legal framework of how data should be protected in India, and from that we can hope they can include the principles of right to be forgotten, that is not there, the data minimization principle, that is not there, and how the data should be processed in general, because the IT rule doesn't refer to all these principles in general, and it creates a very big void in regard to how the data should be protected in India. So that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.